Hello, my dear channel members. We are back with another post-show bonus video thing, and I'm starting to think that maybe it would be a good idea to cancel the post-show. I don't know. Cancel the post-show as a concept, not the bonus content. There would still be members-only videos coming out here and there, once a week, a few times a month, whatever it ends up being. There would still be bonus content, but I'm starting to think that the post-show concept might have been a little stupid. I do a live stream that is hours long. Some of you are there the whole time, and then I drop another thing that's like 40 minutes long and expect you to watch it. Maybe that was a little dumb, because that's at the point where you're probably most fatigued with my content, where maybe you should take a break, maybe you should go outside, maybe you should just watch somebody else for a minute, maybe just giving you more of me all at once isn't the best idea. Maybe I need to breathe a little bit there. So let me know what you think. If you're cool with me just doing sporadic members only videos rather than a formalized post show thing. The one thing that I do like about the post show, it's a predictable format. You'll know when something's coming out and you'll be there and ready, and you're ready for the drop, because it's hard to notify you when the members only stuff is coming out. YouTube system just isn't the best on that. So I would like to maybe go to a more sporadic upload thing, kind of in the same spirit of doing reacty whatever things, but I don't know, just not being this formal thing that is designed to drop after the live stream, because I don't think it necessarily has to be that. I don't know if that even helps with the viewership of the, I don't even know if it's a better experience for the members themselves. So you're the only ones who could really tell me how you feel about that. You know, if you want to weigh the pros and cons and let me know, you can. Now, whatever, we've talked about the post show enough on the post show. Let's actually get to the post show, which may or may not be the final in this format, but still virtually the same as how the bonus videos will be going in the future. So whatever. Crash Course Government and Politics. I want to continue to go back to this series, so today we're going to be doing a little bit more. We've got episode 6, which is congressional elections, which should be a lot of fun. And then after that, we have congressional committees. That should be fun, because I don't fully understand exactly how congressional committees go. Some of them, it feels like they do stuff. Some of it feels like they don't really matter. And I don't know if that's just my ignorance showing that, like, I don't see the importance of this environmental committee and how they're really pushing policy or whatever and really making a difference. I don't know if maybe I'm just missing the point, or if really committees are whatever. So actually, this is probably the most I'm going to learn from one of these things. Congressional elections are one thing, but committees, I think I have a lot of room to learn there. So let's get elections started, then we'll do committees. All right.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics. And today we're going to talk about what is, if you ask the general public, the most important part of politics: elections. If you ask me, it's hairstyles. Look at Martin Van Buren's sideburns. How could he not be elected? Americans are kind of
okay.
Styles.
Okay. Like his sideburns are all right. Like he was a mess. Let's be real. And I'm a mess myself, but there are better sideburns in presidential history. And who couldn't elect him? Well, guy ran a lot. He won once, but like he generally does not have a good record in elections. So I guess most people wouldn't elect him. That is what it is. I know that was like a joke, and I gave a serious-ish response to, which kind of ruins jokes, but that's what we do sometimes. Sometimes we ruin jokes.
Martin Van Buren's sideburns. How could he not be elected? Americans are kind of obsessed with elections. I mean, when this was being recorded in early 2015, television news and the internet were already talking about who would be Democrat and Republican candidates for president in 2016. And many of the candidates have unofficially been campaigning for years.
Dude.
I've been campaigning. Your grandma's been campaigning. Presidential elections are exciting, and you can gamble on them.
He's got a year coming. He's got some years ahead of him. I wish I could return to this man's time. Oh gosh.
Is that legal? Can you gamble on them, Stan? And anyway, why we're so obsessed with them is a topic for another day. Right now, I'm going to tell you that the fixation on the presidential elections is wrong. But not because the president doesn't matter. No, today we're going to look at the elections of the people that are supposed to matter the most. Congress.
So I like that he highlights that. Sometimes it feels like the president overshadows where the real action is, and that's in Congress. However, it really depends on who the president is. I think we can really see it now. A lot of the attention was on Donald Trump for so long that you may have missed a lot of the stuff that was going on in Congress. However, right now, I feel like Congress is at the forefront. I feel like, I don't want to say Joe Biden is asleep at the wheel, but he definitely isn't where most of the action is. A lot of the actions in Congress, a lot of the action is with the states, really. This whole COVID thing has highlighted the power of the states, probably more now than in recent history. So we're in an interesting time right now.
Constitutionally, at least, Congress is the most important branch of government because it is the one that is supposed to be the most responsive to the people. One of the main reasons it's so responsive, at least in theory, is the frequency of elections. If a politician has to run for office often, he or she, because unlike the president, we have women serving in Congress, kind of has to pay attention to what the constituents want. A little bit. Maybe. By now, I'm sure that most of you memorized the Constitution, so you recognize that, despite their importance in the way we discuss politics, elections...
As somebody who's studied plenty of elements of the Constitution, I have not memorized the Constitution. It's one of those things, if I need to go back to it, I can reference it. It's fine. I don't bother with memorization of most things, let alone that document.
Aren't really a big feature of the Constitution. Except, of course, for the ridiculously complex electoral college system for choosing the president, which we don't even want to think about for a few episodes.
That's going to be a fun episode.
What the Constitution says about congressional elections in Article 1, Section 2.
The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature.
So it's interesting we get to talk about the founding fathers a little bit here because they are the framers of the Constitution. What would they think? And people always go back to what they think. Personally, I don't care what they think or what they thought. It's more like, how can we interpret things to work for us in the world that we now live in? But generally, it is good to understand where things came from. The founders were not democratic in nature. They saw democracy as being in line with things like anarchy or mob rule, which is weird to think. Democracy is very popular today. If you took a democratic vote, well, you don't really vote on what's good or not. I get a poll. If you did a poll, people would generally, probably overwhelmingly agree that democracy is a pretty good thing. But at the time, it was seen as something that had to be balanced and the influence of the people had to be resisted. There had to be like a line between the representative and the people where the representative could make independent decisions of the people. It's not a direct democracy. And that 2 years thing, every second year, that's deliberate. They spent a lot of time thinking, how long does somebody stay in office before they're voted out? Those who may have been leaned a little bit more towards being like pure Democrats, they might have said, let's do it every year. But others would be like, no, it's got to be 2 years because they need more time to get stuff done before they get voted out.
The Constitution does establish that the entire House is up for election every 2 years, and 1/3 of the Senate is too, but mainly it leaves the scheduling and rules of elections up to the states. The actual rules of elections, like when the polls are open and where they actually are, as well as the registration requirements, are pretty much up to the states, subject to some federal election law. If you really want to know the rules in your state, I'm sure that someone at the Board of Elections will be happy to explain them to you. Really, you should give them a call. They're very lonely. In general, though, here's what we can say about American elections. First, stating the super obvious, in order to serve in Congress, you need to win an election. In the House of Representatives, each election district chooses a single representative, which is why we call them single-member.
Oh, are we going to talk about gerrymandering? That's probably its own episode. I'd imagine gerrymandering has to be its own episode, but we definitely have to talk about districting. Because when you look here, you see the little divides between different places. How do you draw electoral districts? And when you do draw districts, how do you draw it in a way that makes the most sense? And if you're cynical, how do you draw it in a way that benefits your party the most? That's what's we're gonna talk about more when we get to gerrymandering. If it's in this episode, great. If there's an episode in itself about gerrymandering, we'll get more into detail about it.
Districts. The number of districts is determined by the census, which happens every 10 years, and which means that elections ending in zeros are super important for reasons that I'll explain in greater detail in a future episode. It's because of gerrymandering. The Senate is much easier to figure out because both of the...
So I'll try to keep my gerrymandering comments to a minimum today because clearly there is more of that to come.
State senators are elected by the entire state. It's as if the state itself were a single district, which is true for states like Wyoming, which are so unpopulated as to have only one representative. Sometimes these elections are called at-large elections. Before the election ever happens, you need candidates. How candidates are chosen differs from state to state, but usually it has something to do with political parties, although it doesn't have to. Why are things so complicated? What we can say...
And it actually favors people who are in a powerful political party. It's actually very difficult for what we call third parties to pop up. The way that the system is made, it kind of rigs it in favor of the two dominant parties right now. And they both have a vested interest in keeping third parties out because it could totally tilt the balance of power. And both parties have sort of a monopoly on their own wing of politics. So they don't really want to jeopardize that.
Is that candidates, or at least good candidates, usually have certain characteristics. Sorry, America. First off, if you are going to run for office, you should have an unblemished record, free of, felony convictions or sex scandals, except maybe in Louisiana or anything.
Is that Anthony Weiner?
Some pretty bland.
I think I don't remember his face. That might have been Weiner, who was famous for sending pictures of his wiener to people. I think that was a scandal at the time. I think that would fit when this guy is recording this. Okay. Yeah, that was a thing. I believe he was reasonably popular before that happened. So, yeah, that kind of blew it for him. Though I think today people are a bit calloused to political scandal. A little bit, like, we kind of expect politicians to be at least a little bit messed up, a little bit corrupt. So if you're inclined to believe them already and you're inclined to like fall in line with them, you'd be more willing to rationalize the bad sides of stuff regardless, because you know you're kind of working to an end. It doesn't really matter what's in the middle. You have to get to that end point where you're in line with the person who's in your political box. Please don't think like that. It's just completely brain dead, but like it's so easy to get caught into like binary political thinking. I've been guilty of that myself at times.
And candidates, or people who are so calculating that they have no skeletons in their closet. But we Americans are a moral people and like our candidates to reflect our ideals rather than our reality. The second characteristic that a candidate must possess is the ability to raise money. Now, some candidates are billionaires and can finance their own campaigns, but most
Bloomberg is a big example of that. Bloomberg ran in the Democratic primary for 2020, which that was a bit of a mess. He failed the first section. He had scandals. He had tons of like non-disclosure agreements with former I was about to say former female employees. Former employees who are females. That could imply that they were previously female, but not anymore. But former employees that he almost certainly did some bad stuff to. Because you don't get NDAs with several employees unless you're like a freaky, disgusting monster of a human being, which Bloomberg probably is. Yeah.
Billionaires have better things to do, buying yachts, making even more money.
But yeah, he financed his election and he didn't win. The money did not buy the election there, fortunately, because I think that was the worst case scenario in my mind. Like, he was the one I hated the most in like across the board. I hate Bloomberg so much.
Building money forts, buying more yachts. So they don't have time to run for office. But most candidates get their money from their campaigns by asking for it. The ability to raise money is key, especially now, because running for office is expensive. Can I get a how expensive is it? How expensive is it? Well, so expensive that the price of elections continually rises. And in 2012, winners of House races spent nearly $2 million each. Senate winners spent more than $10 million. By the time this episode airs, I'm sure the numbers will be much higher, like a gajillion.
So that is an important detail, and a lot of the money, well, it's all about who can give you the most money. There are some candidates, and we're fortunate to have them every once in a while, that rely heavily on small dollar donors, but most of the entrenched, gross, disgusting swamp creatures that run the government tend to get most of their money from large donors. And those donors have their own interests. Some are weapons manufacturers, so hey, let's give the weapons manufacturer a contract. Or maybe we have let me think of it, Wall Street. Big names in Wall Street will end up giving money, and it's like, oh, hey, let's deregulate Wall Street. You see how being tied to big money like that would cause a politician to maybe serve the person who's actually getting them elected, and that's the person paying for all those garbage campaign ads that somehow keep working.
Billion.
I'm a little salty today. This is not... I'm a little off, sorry.
Million. Money is important in winning an election, but even more important, statistically at least, is already being in Congress. Let's go to the thought bubble. The person holding an office who runs for that
name recognition, probably,
incumbent, and has a big advantage over any challenger. This is according to political scientists who, being almost as bad at naming things as historians, refer to this as incumbency advantage. There are a number of reasons why incumbents tend to hold on to their seats in Congress, if they want to. The first is a sitting congressman has a record to run on, which we hope includes some legislative accomplishments, although for the past few Congresses, these don't seem to matter. The record might include casework, which is providing direct services to constituents. This is usually done by congressional staffers and includes things like answering questions about how to get certain government benefits or writing recommendation letters to West Point. Congressmen can also provide jobs to constituents, which is usually a good way to get them to vote for you. These are either government jobs, kind of rare these days, called patronage, or indirect employment through government contracts for programs within a congressman's district. These programs are called earmarks or pork barrel programs, and they are much less common now because Congress has decided not to use them anymore. Sort of. The second advantage that incumbents have is that they have a record of winning elections, which, if you think about it, is pretty obvious. Being a proven
And theoretically, in that amount of time, you hope you have something to brag about.
winner makes it easier for a congressman to raise money, which helps them win. And long-term incumbents tend to be more powerful in Congress, which makes it even easier for them to raise money and win. The Constitution gives incumbents one structural advantage, too. Each elected congressman is allowed $100,000 in free postage to send out election materials. This is called the franking privilege. It's not so clear how great an advantage this is in the age of the internet, but at least according to the book The Victory Lab, direct mail from candidates can be surprisingly effective. How real?
I actually didn't know about that. That one is completely new to me. I didn't know they got any sort of like a financial advantage outside of the stuff that comes from the name recognition, that comes from the established relationships with the people giving out the money. I didn't know that they actually basically get free postage. That's a new one. I wish we had a means of fixing this so that the messaging was a little bit more equal across the board, and people just had the ability to judge what messaging they find superior. But the people who get to make that decision are the ones that are benefiting from the broken system. So here we are. They don't really have any incentive to really change all that much if they don't have to. It's what puts them in power. And why would they change something that would only serve to benefit their opposition? They wouldn't. That's the answer. They wouldn't.
If you look at the numbers, it seems pretty darn real. Over the past 60 years, almost 90% of members of the House of Representatives got reelected. The Senate has been more volatile, but even at the low point in 1980, more than 50% of sitting senators got to keep their jobs. Thanks, Thought Bubble. You're so great. So, those are some of the features of congressional elections. Now, if you'll permit me to get a little politically sciencey, I'd like to try to explain why elections are so important to the way that congressmen and senators do their jobs. In 1974, political scientist David Mayhew published a book in which he described something he called the electoral connection. This was the idea that congressmen were primarily motivated by the desire to get reelected, which intuitively makes a lot of sense, even though I'm not sure what evidence he had for this conclusion. He used to be able to get away with that kind of thing, I guess. Clearly, David may not hew to the rules of evidence. Fun.
Oh my God.
Anyway, Mayhew's research methodology isn't as important as his idea itself because the electoral connection provides a framework for understanding congressmen's activities. Mayhew divided representatives' behavior and activities into 3 categories. The first is advertising. Congressmen work to develop their personal brands so that they are recognizable to voters. Al D'Amato used to be known in New York as Senator Pothole because he was able to bring home so much pork that he could actually fix New York's streets. Not by filling them with pork. By money, it's money. Remember pork barrel spending? The second.
Yeah. Pothole politics is really huge where I live. I've talked about Vincent Cianci in the past. He was the Providence mayor. Providence is the capital of my state. It was really interesting because he was so obviously corrupt, but everybody sort of knew that everybody in Providence was sort of corrupt. So what motivated people to continue to vote for Vincent Cianci? Well, he had a good record filling that pothole in front of your house. I use the term pothole politics because, like, it is something that's pretty big here. I don't know how well that applies across the board. Maybe there are places with, like, the problem is that our roads are generally not good over here, and then we get bad weather and the snow plows end up freaking up our roads even worse. Trying to fix the problem, it causes more problems, so we continuously have road problems. So some places may not have the same emphasis on that sort of stuff. You might think like, oh, a pothole, how important is that? Well, you know, it's pretty important when it's like always a problem.
Activity is credit claiming. Congressmen get things done so that they can say they got them done. A lot of casework, and especially pork barrel spending, are done in the name of credit claiming. Related to credit claiming, but slightly different, is position taking. This means making a public judgmental statement on something likely to be of interest to voters. Senators can do this through filibusters. Representatives can't filibuster, but they can hold hearings. Publicly supporting a hearing is a way of associating yourself with an idea without having to actually try to pass legislation.
Yeah, and you could see this in a couple ways. That could be a way of trying to push the public into supporting an idea, and maybe like you move the line a little bit, maybe you get more people on your side, you'll have more support and you can actually get stuff done. Or you could say, well, they're all bark and no bite. This is basically virtue signaling. I guess it depends it's a case-by-case thing. There are plenty of politicians that support things and have no intention of actually passing them, therefore they don't really support them. But, oh, sorry, I burped. You know what I'm trying to say.
And of course, they can go on the TV,
drinking soda at night.
Talk shows. What's a TV? Who even watches TV? Now, the idea of the electoral connection doesn't explain every action a member of Congress takes. Sometimes they actually make laws to benefit the public good, or maybe solve problems. What an idea. But Mayhew's idea gives us a way of thinking about congressional activity, an analytical lens that connects what congressmen actually do with how most of us understand congressmen, through elections. So the next time you see a congressman calling for a hearing on a supposed horrible scandal or read about a senator threatening to filibuster a policy that may have significant popular support, ask yourself, is this representative claiming credit or taking a position, and how will this build their brand? In other words, what's the electoral connection, and how will whatever they're doing help them get elected? This might feel a little cynical, but the reality.
If anybody knows why I'm focused on his mug so much, let me know. I don't know if his mug is like a reference, if that pattern is something. Well, for some reason, I can't take my eye off his mug. It just stands out so much. What is it? What's that design? Is that just a generic design? I need to know. Let me know.
The reality is Mayhew's thesis often seems to fit with today's politics. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Vote for me. I'm on the TV. I'm not. I'm on YouTube. Crash Course Government and Politics.
We're gonna get into committees now. So committees are confusing to me. Like I've said, it seems like some committees have power and some committees don't, so maybe there's different kinds of committees. I don't fully understand it all. Sometimes I feel like committees get played up real big and make it feel like people are getting stuff done when they're not, but it also does feel like there has to be some sort of practical reason for why there's such a big conversation, but I don't have a full appreciation for what that is. So this is actually a place where I have a lot of room to learn. Let's learn. And you're gonna learn with me.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're gonna get down and dirty, wallowing in the mud that is Congress. Okay. Maybe that's a little unfair, but the workings of Congress are kind of arcane, or Byzantine, or maybe let's just say extremely complex and confusing. Like me, or Game of Thrones, without the nudity. Some of the nudity, maybe. However, Congress is the most important branch, so it would probably behoove most Americans to know how it works. I'm gonna try to explain. Be prepared to be behooved.
I'm down for all the behooving. Behoove me, please.
Both the House of Representatives and the Senate are divided up into committees in order to make them more efficient. The committees you hear about most are the standing committees, which are relatively permanent and handle the day-to-day business of Congress. The House has 19 standing committees and the Senate 16.
Okay. Agricultural, appropriations, armed services, budget, education and labor, energy and commerce, financial service. I believe I've seen... So some of these are really important. I believe I also read, though, that, like, one of these, like, energy ones... What was it? No, it was like an environment one that basically has no power, but some of these definitely do have power, so there's definitely a distinction to be made here.
Congressmen and senators serve on multiple committees. Each committee has a chairperson, or chair, who is the one who usually gets mentioned in the press, which is why you would know the name of the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Tell us in the
Ways and Means.
Or tell us if you are on the committee. Or just say hi. Congress creates special or select committees.
I actually don't know who it is right now.
Beyond the jurisdiction of standing committees. Some of them are temporary, and some, like the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, are permanent. Some of them have only an advisory function, which means they can't write laws. The Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming has only advisory authority, which tells you...
There we go. That might have even been Energy Independence and Global Warming. That makes sense that they would have no power. Oh, it's always the things that I like that never get to go anywhere. But yeah, okay. So not all committees are created equal. That's a start. That's a start to me slightly understanding that committees matter, but not all of them matter.
Pretty much all you need to know about Congress and climate change. There are joint committees made up of members of both houses. Most of them are standing committees and they don't do a lot, although the Joint Committee on the Library oversees the Library of Congress, without which we would not be able to
That's important.
a lot of these pictures, like that one, and that one. And, ooh, that one's my favorite. Other committees are conference committees, which are created to reconcile a bill when the House and Senate write different versions of it. But I'll talk about those later when we try to figure out how a bill becomes a law. So why does Congress have so many committees? The main reason is that it's more efficient to write legislation in a smaller group rather than a larger one. Congressional committees also allow...
I actually didn't grow up with Schoolhouse Rock. I don't know much about it, but I know the I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill or something. I actually don't even know how the song goes. but it's something that a generation slightly older than me grew up with in the United States. I know a lot of you aren't from the United States, so you might have no idea what I'm talking about.
Congressmen to develop expertise on certain topics. So a congressperson from Iowa can get on an agriculture committee because that is an issue he presumably knows something about if he pays attention to his constituents. Or a congressperson from Oklahoma could be on the regulation of wind rolling down the plain committee. Committees allow members of Congress to follow their own interests. So
is that shade or just too real?
Try to get on the Armed Services Committee. Probably more important, serving on a committee is something that a congressperson can claim credit for and use to build up his or her brand when it comes
to resume building.
Congress also has committees for historical reasons. Congress is pretty tradish, which is what you say when you don't have time to say traditional. Anyway, it doesn't seem much need to change a system that has worked for the most part since 1825. That doesn't mean that Congress hasn't tried to tweak the system. Let's talk about how committees actually work in the thought bubble. Any member of Congress can propose a bill. This is called proposal power, but it has to go to a committee first. Then to get to the rest of the House or Senate, it has to be reported out of committee. The chair determines the agenda by choosing which issues get considered. In the House, the Speaker refers bills to particular committees, but the committee chair has some discretion over whether or not to act on the bills. This power to control what ideas do or do not become bills is what political scientists call gatekeeping authority, and it's a
So, I get this. I get why this is a thing, because there is a certain degree of like where you have to determine whether something. First of all, you could get rid of a lot of things in committee that just have no chance of, like, if it can't get through committee, it probably can't get through like the actual legislature. So, like, I understand that part. But there's a part of me that doesn't like that it can be squashed so easily before it even gets a chance. But that's sort of a thing. I have like this anti-bureaucracy streak, but I also understand that that's fueled by passion, and that a lot of my anger in general is in the fact that I feel that the people in charge of making a lot of these decisions is cynical, and my feelings would probably be far more rational if I felt that the people making the decisions could be trusted. So there's me. That's where I fall here. Not trusting anybody, just generally miserable.
A remarkably important power that we rarely ever think about, largely because when a bill doesn't make it onto the agenda, there's not much to write or talk about. The committee chairs also manage the actual process of writing a bill, which is called markup, and the vote on the bill in the committee itself. If a bill doesn't receive a majority of votes in the committee, it won't be reported out to the full House or Senate. In this case, we say the bill died in committee, and we have a small funeral on the National Mall. Now we just put it in the
sad day.
Anyway, committee voting is kind of an efficient practice. If a bill can't command a majority in a small committee, it doesn't have much chance on the floor of either house. Committees can...
But I believe like committees are also kind of designed, like this will definitely... Committees could have the capacity to squash things before they get to a bigger vote if the people on that particular committee are selected in order to do that. Like the people who get the committee positions, perhaps they're all of a particular political wing, not necessarily of a particular political party, but they're all sort of leaning in a certain way on something. They could crush something before it gets to the people who maybe are more likely to vote for it. So I could see this being abused. It probably is abused.
Kill bills by just not voting on them, but it is possible in the House to force them to vote by filing a discharge petition. But this almost never happens. Gatekeeping authority is Congress's most important power, but it also has oversight power, which is an after-the-fact authority to check up on how law is being implemented. Committees exercise oversight by assigning staff to scrutinize a particular law or policy and by holding hearings. Holding hearings is an excellent way to take a position on a particular issue. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, those are the basics of how committees work, but I promised you we'd go beyond the basics, so here we go, into the realm of congressional history. Since Congress started using committees, they have made a number of changes, but the ones that have bent the Congress into its current shape occurred under the speakership of Newt Gingrich in 1994. Overall, Gingrich increased the power of the Speaker, who was already pretty powerful. The number of subcommittees was reduced, and seniority rules in appointing chairs
I start to growl and become a demon every once in a while.
were changed. Before Gingrich, or BG, the chair of a committee was usually the longest-serving member of the majority party, which for most of the 20th century was the Democrats. AG Congress, or Anno Gingrichi Congress, holds votes to choose the chairs. The Speaker...
That might have been the best joke he's made in this series so far. And I'm not even kidding. I'm not trying to insult him either. Like, that might be the best one, though.
Has a lot of influence over who gets chosen on these votes, which happen more regularly because the Republicans also imposed term limits on the committee chairs. Being able to offer chairmanships to loyal party members gives the Speaker a lot more influence over the committees themselves. The Speaker also increased his, or her, this is the first time we can say that, thanks Nancy Pelosi, power to refer bills to committee and act as gatekeeper. Gingrich also made changes to congressional staffing, but before we discuss the changes, let's spend a minute or two looking at congressional staff in general. There are two types of congressional staff: the staff assistants that each congressperson or senator has to help him or her with the actual job of being a legislator, and the staff agencies that work for Congress as a whole. The staff of a congressperson is incredibly important. Some staffers' job is to research and write legislation, while others do casework, like responding to constituents' requests. Some staffers perform personal functions like keeping track of a congressperson's calendar, or most importantly, making coffee. Can we get a staffer in here? As Congresspeople spend more and more time raising money, more and more of the actual legislative work is done by staff. In addition to the individual staffers, Congress as a whole has specialized staff agencies that are supposed to be more independent. You may have heard of these agencies, or at least some of them. The Congressional Research Service is supposed to perform unbiased factual research.
I know about that.
And their staff to help them in the process of writing the actual bills. The Government Accountability Office is a branch of Congress that can investigate the finances and administration of any government administrative office. The Congressional Budget...
We have that, and we're not using it more? Or maybe we are, and I'm not aware. This last one looks like the Patreon logo.
That can investigate the finances and administration of any government administrative office. The Congressional Budget Office assesses the likely costs and impact of legislation. When the CBO looks at the cost of a particular bill, it's called scoring the bill. The congressional reforms after 1994 generally increased the number of individual staff and reduced the staff of the staff agencies. This means that more legislation comes out of the offices of individual congresspeople. The last feature of Congress that I'm going to mention, briefly because their actual function and importance is nebulous, is the caucus system. These are caucuses in Congress, so don't confuse them with the caucuses that some states use to choose candidates for office, like the ones in Iowa. Caucuses are semi-formal groups of congresspeople organized around particular identities or interests. Semi-formal in this case doesn't mean that they wear suits and ties. It means that they don't have official function in the legislative process. But you know what? Class it up a little. Just try to look nice. The Congressional Black Caucus is made up of the African-American members of the legislature. The Republican Study Group is the conservative caucus that meets to discuss conservative issues and develop legislative strategies. Since 2010, there is also a Tea Party caucus in Congress. There are also caucuses for...
Oh, the Tea Party. We don't even use that. I wonder if that caucus still exists. I don't know if anybody still identifies with the Tea Party, but the Tea Party is still kind of an idea that kind of looms. That sort of unfocused aggression of the Tea Party movement is sort of what rolled into what we call Trumpism today. Like, Trump kind of rode that Tea Party wave, despite the fact that the Tea Party as an entity has sort of died. A lot of the energy behind it has been harnessed into sort of like this Trump era that we are now still in, really. Even though he's out of office, he's still kind of the man as far as the Republican Party goes. He still has an incredible amount of influence, and he's probably going to run again if he can.
Very specific interests, like the Bike Caucus that focuses on cycling. There should also be a beard caucus, shouldn't there? Is there a beard caucus?
They don't have enough beards.
What about an eagle punching caucus? The purpose of these caucuses is for like-minded people to gather and discuss ideas. The caucuses can help members of Congress coordinate their efforts and also provide leadership opportunities for individual congresspeople outside of the more formal structures of committees. There are a lot of terms and details to remember, but here's the big thing to take away. Caucuses, congressional staff, and especially committees all exist to make the process of lawmaking more efficient. In particular, committees and staff allow individual legislators to develop expertise. This is the theory, anyway. Yes, it's a theory. Committees also serve a political function of helping congresspeople build an identity for voters that should help them get elected. In some ways, this is just as important as their role in the process of making actual legislation. When Congress doesn't pass many laws, committee membership, or better yet, being a committee chair, is one of the only ways that a congressperson can distinguish him or herself. At least it gives you something more to learn about incumbents when you're making your voting choices. Thanks for watching.
Don't worry about that.
See you next week. Crash Course is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. Support for Crash Course, U.S. government, comes from Vocal. Vocal supports nonprofits that use technology and media to advance social equity. Learn more about their mission and initiatives at vocal.org. Crash Course is made with all of these lovely people. Thanks for watching. Staffer, coffee, please.
All right, so yeah, thank you guys for watching. I enjoyed this one because this highlighted elements of committees that I didn't fully understand. I didn't really get the distinction. I still don't think I fully understand, but I think I'm a lot closer. Like, as much closer as I could have gotten over the course of an 8-minute video. I'm sure this is something that could be studied in greater depth, but I think I get now that committees are complex and layered, and not all committees are created equal, and that it's as important as the powers that are actually vested in said committee, which for as far as the environment goes, we're screwed, but in some ways committees can be very important. So learned something there. So hey, so thank you all for watching today's post show. I don't know if it's going to continue being in like the post show form, but I'll be back with some more members only stuff in the very near future, I'm sure. Thank you for watching, and I'll try to keep you all updated on whatever's going on. So thank you, and that's all. Bye. Bumping out of frame.